So today's lecture is English as a foreign language methodology. So the objectives of this course. At the end of this course, you will be able to use various effective foreign language teaching methods, identify a learner's needs and motivation, manage your classroom with different approaches and activities. Also, you will be able to develop effective activities for listening, speaking, reading, and writing, and also develop a lesson activity that incorporates critical thinking and problem-solving skills such as analysis, synthesis, evaluation, decision-making, creative thinking, apply good feedback and assessment forms, as well as teaching, developing teaching skills, and also design your own course. So the first method in EFL methodology is grammar translation. So this approach focuses on gaining knowledge of the language, but not fluency. So grammar and accuracy are stressed here, and the grammar is learned through reading, translation, drills, repetition, and memorization. So the classroom is a formal setting, and this method is teacher-centered. And therefore, tasks are mechanical and lacking in creativity. So language settings of the past mainly employed this approach, and the motivation for students is a problem, and the language is learned as opposed to acquired. So the next methodology is audiolingual method. So audiolingual method. So what is audiolingual method? So principally, the audiolingual method is focused on repetition, drill, dialogue memorization, grammar game, transformation drill, complete the dialogue, backward build-up expansion. However, we have to highlight the disadvantage of this method is that it lacks teaching explanation. So the next one is communicative method. So communicative method is one of the widely used methods which is used in Kazakhstan nowadays. So this approach teaches language as it is used in real life. So the focus on conversation, including fluency and pronunciation, communication, and the listening comprehension. So it uses communicative tasks and activities. The aim is to help students use the language instead of knowing the language to help students, just technically. And therefore, this approach is student-centered because the teacher here as a guide and as a director. So it is less structured and more motivating, fun, and participatory. So teachers can be creative using this approach. Also, we'll have to highlight that this approach applies mainly to students who have had some previous exposure and experience to the English language. So the next methodology is called total physical response, in short TPR. So what is TPR? So this method is an example of the comprehension approach to language teaching. So the listening and the responding with action serves two purposes. So first is it is a means of quickly recognizing meaning in the language being learned, and the second purpose is a means of passively learning the structure of the language itself. So as it is called TPR, here the instructors give commands to students, so in the form of, in the target language with body language, as well as the learners should respond again using their gestures, their body. So grammar is not taught explicitly, but can be learned from the language input. So TPR is a valuable way to learn vocabulary, especially idiomatic terms, for example, phrasal verbs, and so on. And the TPR is widely used when a teacher works with primary children. So the next method is called natural. This approach focuses on having students, speaking naturally in English by having free-flow conversation and not being afraid of using English or making errors. So the aim is to get the learners to use the language in a meaningful way as soon as possible. So the focus is on speaking and the students' accomplishments. The students learn naturally through a process of natural language progression. So students are comfortable and enjoy using the language. However, it should be again, pointed out that students willingly participate because they do not, fear making mistakes. Errors are not corrected, and this is the main disadvantage of this method because sometimes errors can be, fossilized. For example, some students can say, I must to go, or I can to go instead of I must go and I can go. So the next methodology is called task-based learning. So sometimes we say in short TBL. So this approach refers to language mainly by having students focus on a task or activity that requires students to use the language. So speaking and fluency are focused on with this approach. So by the way, we have to again mention that task-based learning and the natural method is a combination of communicative approach. So this task the tasks and activities usually involve pair work or sometimes group work, or sometimes even small group work, and students interact, in a social and specific context. So this approach is excellent for creative thinking and the student interaction. However, again, it might be difficult to monitor all students, use the language all time. And some examples of these tasks are, for example, follow directions on a map, hide and seek, treasure hunts, for example, question and answer in order to complete the task, or ordering food at a mock restaurant, and so on. So we have to again, remember that when you use different, methodology, again, it depends on your time and it depends on the language level of your learners. So next methodology is learner-based method, or sometimes we say student-centered method. This approach is, as I have already said, that student-centered and focuses on students' needs and weaknesses. So it uses the student as a valuable information resource in the classroom. So extract student relevant vocabulary and topics because later you can build up your lesson from there, what they want, what their weaknesses. So this approach helps to create independent learners by teaching students to self-correct and peer correct. And here again I have to highlight that learner-based approach as a part of personalized or differentiated approach that are used nowadays in Kazakhstan schools too. So the next one is whole language or integrated method. So this approach focuses on teaching all aspects of the English language simultaneously, which means you teach in one class simultaneously, speaking, writing, listening, and reading. There is no emphasis on just one aspect. So this approach is applicable when, for example, student begins the English language, or sometimes we use this language with zero beginners. So next method is called lexical. So this approach focuses on vocabulary, as it says, lexical, and all other language skills at secondary. So it, concentrates on teaching students the language word by word or in groups of related words. For example, fruit, family, or family members, or for example, numbers, and so on. And sometimes you can put it like, explaining or presenting some chunks, like, for example, set expressions. And the retention of all new vocabulary is concerned when using this approach, because you see, when you all the time give the members, family members or some other topics of this vocabulary, it is really very hard to remember and to keep the words in the memories. So next method, we call it like personal method. Personal method involves many approaches and can be selected to meet the needs and the requirements of your learners. Again, you have to remember that it depends on the level, motivation, age, and criteria, for example, interests, and so on. Sometimes students can learn the language in order to pass, for example, IELTS or TOEFL tests, or sometimes they can apply for different programs abroad, and therefore personal method is really good application. So thank you for your attention.